CWS LCC of Colorado Springs, Colorado, protests the issuance of a sole source purchase order to PK Management Group Incorporated, PKMG, of Doral, Florida, under a sole source justification issued by the Department of Housing and Urban Affairs, HUD, for a 12-month contract to provide field service management, FSM, services for properties in Illinois, identified by the agency as Area 3A. CWS argues that HUD lacked a valid basis to award a sole source contract on the basis of unusual and compelling urgency, and that the urgent circumstances were invalidated by the agency's lack of reasonable planning. The procurement at issue is HUD's action to obtain a successor FSM contractor for HUD Area 3A. Before this procurement, the FSM requirement for Area 3A had been awarded to another contractor. The contract resulted from a competition for multiple contracts, for multiple HUD areas, that were awarded in mid-2017 as small business set-asides. HUD deemed Contractor A's performance unsatisfactory and, after several lesser measures were unsuccessful, the contracting officer informed Contractor A on April 23, 2018, that the agency would not exercise the option to extend the term of the contract beyond the base period. Instead, the contract would end at the conclusion of the base period, on May 31. As a result, the agency needed a replacement contractor to be in place on June 1 to begin full performance without a transition. HUD determined that a contractor would therefore need to have credentialed staff and offices in place, and experience providing these services for HUD specifically in Contract Area 3A. As a general rule, contracts must be awarded through the use of full and open competition. Our review of an agency's decision to conduct a sole source procurement focuses on the adequacy of the rationale and conclusions set forth in the written justification. When that document sets forth a reasonable justification for the agency's actions, we will not object to the award. When using other than full and open competitive procedures based on unusual and compelling urgency, the agency is required to request offers from as many potential sources as is practicable under the circumstances. The agency has the authority to limit the procurement to the only firm the agency reasonably believes can properly perform the work in the available time. This office will object to the agency's determination to limit competition based on unusual and compelling urgency where the agency's decision lacks a reasonable basis, however. Our review of the record here supports the reasonableness of HUD's actions. First, although CWS questions the urgency of HUD's requirement to provide FSM services given the imminent end of Contractor A's contract, the circumstances support HUD's judgment. In particular, the lack of FSM services would result in serious injury to the agency's property resulting from increased damage to properties by theft and vandalism, and incidents of adverse occupancy. Those incidents would in turn slow the marketing of properties, decrease their values, increase cost and time for repairs, and adversely affect the surrounding neighborhoods and communities. In our view, HUD reasonably concluded that those effects were sufficiently likely and serious to justify the award of a sole source contract on an unusual and compelling urgent basis to a firm that could take over FSM service responsibilities on June 1. Next, although CWS argues that HUD should at least have held a limited competition, in which CWS asserts that it would have submitted a competitive offer, the record provides no basis to question HUD's judgment that only PKMG could meet the agency's requirements beginning June 1. CWS has not shown that it could have met HUD's requirements to begin full performance on June 1, and instead only theorizes that PKMG might not have met the agency's requirements. In contrast to the agency's explanation of the harms that would result from not having FSM services, CWS has not provided a factual basis to show that HUD's requirements exceeded its minimum needs. Finally, CWS contends that HUD should have begun planning for competition earlier, and that the term of PKMG's contract should have been less than 1 year. We disagree. The record shows that HUD reasonably decided to direct its efforts to obtaining acceptable performance from Contractor A as the contractor selected through competition. HUD's effort to administer that contract to obtain acceptable performance was reasonable, and does not reflect a lack of adequate planning under these circumstances. Additionally, the agency's experience in awarding contracts for FSM services supports its determination that it would be likely to take 10 to 12 months for the agency to complete a competitive procurement and have the replacement contractor in place. Awarding a one-year contract to PKMG was thus a reasonable means to facilitate competition at the earliest feasible opportunity. Taken as a whole, CWAS has not shown a sufficient basis in the record and circumstances here for our office to sustain its challenges to HUD's actions.